The longer you dance naked in the rain, the more likely you'll be hit by lightning. Someone described my book as Tarantino meets Game of Thrones, and that was like the ultimate fanboy moment. I was like, oh my god, that's fantastic. You just got to keep going.
Art Pod.
Mike Shackle, welcome to the Art Pod.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. So what are you working on right now? What is on your plate at the moment?
I have several things I'm working on. I am writing a new detective novel. I write a series of books set in London about a policeman called Detective Inspector Simon Wise. And he sort of, hunts serial killers and all that kind of fun thing. So I'm writing book 5 of that series at the moment.
Okay.
Which is great fun. I have a book about a spy and espionage that's being edited, so I'm waiting for those to come back, and so that's in that sort of lull where I'm thinking about it but not thinking about it and worrying whether it's any good or not.
Right.
I always dread those editor notes where they just say, "What have you done? This is
Right.
terrible." And then I'm also writing a monthly series, which I'm releasing on my website, sort of short stories about an Elizabethan witch hunter and the coming end of the world and all that kind of stuff, which is just my love letter to Pulp Fiction and Robert E. Howard and Sword and Sorcery. And
Right.
I'm literally throwing everything from British mythology in there to Arthurian legends to stealing stuff from Shakespeare,
Borrowing
and doing whatever really. And it's a real labor of love because I'm illustrating all the covers for the books as well and things like that. So
yeah, very cool. So those are actually technically two different people. So if I wanted to talk to the guy writing the spy novels, what's his name?
He's Michael Dillon.
He's Michael Dillon. He's not you. Yeah. He's Michael Dillon.
No. It's mainly for the algorithms, right? Because
totally.
If someone buys a Mike Shackle book, they're used to swords and monsters and things like that. So I personally find it odd because I love everything. I love watching detective dramas and spy dramas, and I love the Game of Thrones type stuff, and
sure,
I love a romantic comedy and everything else. But we seem to have to pigeonhole ourselves into certain niches once we start on these sort of journeys.
That right there that could basically fill out this entire podcast, right? Yeah. Like just that subject alone. That's a huge thing. I think about this all the time as an artist, that's interested in all kinds of different stuff, that wants to play in all kinds of different sandboxes. But there's this difficult thing too, where you've got your quote unquote style that's identifiable. And when you shift between different things, you lose sort of your own personal branding. And I guess on the author front, it's that same kind of thing, but you can just use the pen name. But then do you have to sort of reset everything? Because you're kind of creating a new person, a new identity, a new writer. And so you're sort of starting at scratch whenever you do that in a way, aren't you?
Yeah, completely. Because the people that buy Michael Dillon books don't know Michael Shackle, and the people that buy Mike Shackle books don't care about, sort of contemporary stuff. So it is a complete switch. But the good thing is, once you've been doing this kind of stuff for a while, hopefully you learn from the mistakes you make along the way, so that when you do launch a new persona and get schizophrenic about the stuff, you can, wipe out all those mistakes you made in the past and try and get it even better the next time.
So do you write in certain blocks then? Are you Mike Shackle for a little while, but then you turn into Michael Dillon to sort of keep the vibe in check and the writing style? Is there a different, like the genres are different, but does the writing style change, the voice?
No, I think if you like anything that I write under whatever name, you're going to get really fast-paced, page-turning entertainment. I'm not a writer that is going to be known for flowery prose, and I've got a friend of mine who could write literally 6 pages about the wind blowing through the grass, and you'll be there for the 6 pages because it's so eloquently and beautifully written. Whereas I'm, where's the body coming in?
Right. Yeah. Well,
so something's always happening, and I always try and end every chapter on some kind of oh my god moment. So you want to keep reading and things like that. So what I do though is I have specific playlists of music that I listen to get me into the headspace. So I literally have a crime playlist that I put on when I'm writing a detective book. I've got an espionage playlist that I put on when I'm writing the spy stuff, and then I've got I've got a lot of Viking music that I put on when it's all swords and shields and skulls being split and things like that, and that helps me get into the frame of mind.
Right. Yeah. Wardruna would be a really good one to add.
I love them. They're just so good.
Yeah, stuff like that.
You do want to go running down the street half naked with an axe in your hand.
Well, yeah, like just being natural, being in your natural state. Oh, here, there's I don't know if you can hear that. There's the train that I was mentioning. I'm on the wrong side of the tracks. Yeah. It's that thing. I've got that same thing too, where I've got some projects that are sort of, there's a specific playlist to kind of get you in the vibe for that kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. And Wardruna, there's Heilung, Heilung, I believe the band is called. And that's another good one. That if there's some kind of crossover there between Wardruna and Heilung.
I'll go look it up. But no, that kind of stuff gets me into the right frame of mind because, I have 2 kids I've got to look after and other things going on all the time. So when I sit down to write, I have to really get into the mood quickly and make the most of the time that I have.
Yeah.
So there isn't that luxury of waiting for the muse to come along and inspire me. It's like, okay, you've got an hour. You're going to write now.
Yeah.
Get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were mentioning the flowery speech and all that, just going back to that for a minute, that's one of the things that I actually really found interesting about the Last War series and We Are the Dead. And that was, as I was reading it, I realized there wasn't a lot of that in there, and it left this sort of blank canvas for me to complete it visually in a sense. So it was really interesting. It's like you did that thing where you built it halfway, and I'm not saying it's underdeveloped or anything like that at all, but you left enough gaps where you allowed the reader to fill in the blanks with their own imagination. And that was a really interesting thing that I found, even with the characters, and the setting itself is an interesting mashup of cultural references in a way with the names and the places and this kind of thing. You were really allowed to sort of build it yourself, with your own kind of references. And it didn't feel like this sort of Eurocentric type fantasy setting specifically. It felt like, well, there's a mashup of, I guess what might be Middle Eastern in here. There's definitely some Asian cultural references in there. It was this really interesting thing that felt really imaginative to me, rather than sort of a generic, kind of what you usually see with a Eurocentric type setting.
Well, it is. I mean, there are 2 sides to that. I mean, when I originally sat down to write what became We Are the Dead, I'd written 3 books previous to that. I'd got really nice rejections from agents and things like what. When I say really nice, it wasn't just a form letter of thank you for your interest, but no, they'd actually written, this is really great and this is working, but maybe it's not right for the market or things like that. And I was at this point where I was just going to give up writing because it takes up a huge amount of time. And I just went through one of those moments where you just think, I'm never going to level up to where I want to be. And I had 2 young kids and their Netflix shows to watch and, things, or going to bed early and things like that.
Yeah. Life, this life stuff. Yeah.
And I listened to a podcast and this author I really liked he came out with a quote where he said, "The longer you dance naked in the rain, the more likely you'll be hit by lightning." Like you just got to keep going, and it might happen. And I realized the only way I could guarantee never being published, I could guarantee never being published by giving up.
Yeah.
But if I carried on, there was still the chance of making it. And I realized that I like writing for the enjoyment of creation, and even if it was just me creating stuff for me, an audience of me, that was enough. That was enough to make me happy. And really, all the rest of it is a nice to have. So I wrote a list of all the things that I loved, and what did I, if I was going to write a book, I was just going to make it a love letter to everything that turned me on. So that kind of got me into samurai stuff and, a bit of Star Wars rebellion going on and things like that. And then when I started writing it, I just got in for the first time, and other stuff was happening in the world, and it really felt like the bad guys had won. And I was looking around trying to wondering where the heroes are. I've been raised on pop culture, and there's always a hero riding in on a white horse, and I didn't see anyone. And that just gave me this really sort of nice idea. It was a horrible idea, really. But what if the bad guys won, and there isn't anyone going to save you? It then puts the onus on ordinary people to deal with it, which is the reality of the world we live in, right? You have someone in government somewhere who decides he wants to, but then suddenly we're all like, will this lead to a war? And my son's 14 and he'll be military age in 4 years, and being a creative person, that's where my mind sparked. So that's kind of what got me into writing all this stuff. But I'd spent 25 years living in Asia. So I obviously had a lot of interest in the culture and stuff like that. So that was my main influence. And there was a scene early on where one of the characters is trying to buy some food and she hasn't got enough money, and then she loses the food on her way home because everything gets blown up. And originally she was buying a bag of rice.
Okay.
And I got told to change it to bread because it was too Asian. And the audience was mainly Western, and could I make the whole thing feel more European? So the fact that all the monsters had kind of Japanese ripped off names, and there was a lot of Chinese stuff going on in there with the language and things like that.
Yeah.
I had to change the rice to bread to make it more European.
Right. Yeah. It still works though. It still works. It's a really cool, I mean, it's a mashup of different things going on. And that series, it's genre-wise, I don't even know where to peg it. Would it be, I've been told that it's Grimdark, which sounds super cool. I mean, you put those two words together, that just sounds awesome. Grimdark. Is that something that you would define it as, or is that something that you set out to write within that genre, or how did you approach the...
It's really funny because there's some authors like Joe Abercrombie, his Twitter handle is Lord Grimdark. So he sort of set the standard of this very dark, bleak world where there aren't any heroes, and the people you're rooting for are maybe worse than the bad guys, but you kind of enjoy being with them. And I didn't really set out to write anything that I would classify as grimdark, but I wanted to write something that felt really true about war and living in war. And I think if you're going to get into that, it naturally becomes very grim and very dark because, people are dying. And there's a writer called Greg Rucker who did he writes comic books.
Yeah.
And he did one called
Queen and Country.
Queen and Country,
yeah.
And I've got the page on my wall, and there's a great line on it, and it says, "It's not the bullet with your name on that you have to worry about. It's the one that's marked for all those to who it may concern."
Right? Yeah. Oh, that's good tension building.
and really, I just love that idea of it doesn't matter how good you are,
random.
You can just die at any moment. So I then thought, well, I'm going to write this series, and I've got my characters, but then no one is safe from page one through, and you don't know who's going to live and who's going to die, and there's one character that comes to an untimely death at the end of the second book, and I was literally crying as I wrote, because I love that character so much, and you
spend so much time with them.
Yeah, and you got to be true to that, right? You just, stuff happens, and
not knowing who could be up on the chopping block or who's next or who will make it out to the other end. Did you have this planned out in advance? Did you have the entire series plotted, or did you allow it to organically kind of flow and discover along the way that person's going to die at the end of book 2?
Yeah, I'm a terrible planner. I would love to plan because it would save me time. But I'm very much, I know roughly what's happening, but I'm a very instinctive writer, and I know I have to get to certain places, but how and what happens. And there's a magical moment when you're writing where it feels like you're not making up, you're just writing what's happening, and these characters are so real in your head that the conversations that are happening are just, you're witnessing it rather than telling them what to do.
Hitting a perfect flow state.
Yeah, and the problem with that though is you can, particularly on the second book, I wrote about 70,000 words, and I again, this is where I was trying to force what I'd planned to work, and it just wasn't, and I was just hitting wall after wall after wall, and I don't believe in writer's block as such, but if I can't write, I know I've gone wrong in the story,
right?
And it's my subconscious has like slammed on the brakes and has gone, you need to back up here and work out where you're going because this isn't right. And it's very costly, right? Because you've invested, however many days and hours into writing these words, but you've got to do what's right for the story.
Mm-hmm.
But they're characters that have turned up in the books that I didn't even know were going to turn up, and I didn't know they were going to return until that character walks around the corner and suddenly they're face to face with whoever it is. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, if I'm surprised by that, then the people reading it will be surprised as well.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make.
It is the year of our Lord, 1585. Elizabeth sits upon the English throne. Many call it the Golden Age as poetry, music and literature blossom across the land. However, the peace in which England flourishes is a fragile thing. War with Spain looms ever closer as the Catholic Church seeks to overthrow the woman they know as the heretic queen. As Elizabeth mobilizes the whole country to face this threat, little does she know that a far greater threat is emerging from the shadows. For England was built on dark satanic hills. It is the land of Herne and the wild hunt. It's the home of the bean shear and the black shark. It's where red caps lurk and the selkie linger. Nuckelavee swim in the oceans and ogres frolic in the mountains. And yet, they are not the worst of the horrors to come. If England is to survive, one man must face this evil alone and defeat it. Lord John William le Grey, Witchfinder General to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth. Join him if you dare as darkness falls across the land. The Witchfinder Chronicles by Mike Shackle. Available at mikeshackle.co.uk.
I guess with over planning, you sort of put yourself on rails, and then you're sort of just you're filling in the gaps yourself to get from point A to point B, sort of on the pegboard,
Yeah.
And then there's no room for surprise. So in a way, if you can surprise yourself, and if you can find joy and tragedy and all that along the way as you're writing these people, if you can stay engaged. than the reader can too.
And that's the thing, right? It takes so long to write a book, especially, so, these aren't thin
right. Yeah,
books,
they're huge.
They're chunky things.
Yeah.
So I've got to stay involved in it. But it's funny, Tinstra, who's one of the main characters, when I started writing it, she was this wisecracking, Han Solo type rebel.
Yeah.
And I literally, but I literally couldn't, I kept trying to write it and I just couldn't. I couldn't get past the first chapter.
Right.
And then I suddenly thought, look, well, that's, as much as I love Han Solo, they're not real people.
Well, it's not you, and it's not your character. It's not your creature.
I was thinking about, what would I like being that? What would I be like in that situation? And as much as I'd like to believe I'd be a hero and charging straight ahead and doing the good thing, there's a part of me that thinks I'll be hiding in the cupboard, trying to keep really quiet, hoping that everyone's just going to drift on by and leave me alone. And when I thought that, I thought, wow, I've never really read a coward in this type of fantasy book, right? You're going to put them in the worst possible situation where all they want to do is curl up in a corner and cry and pretend it's not happening to them, and circumstances won't let them do that. And then the moment I decided to make her the coward, she was a joy to write, as I tortured her in every possible way.
Right.
And it's the same with Dren, really, because
it's a great character too. Yeah.
Yeah, he's that cheeky teenager, but he's really a psychopath.
Oh, he's terrible. He's a horrible person, but an absolute delight to spend time with.
Yeah.
And you have, he's terrible, but it's also sort of, he's like everybody, the situations that they're in, it's not of their choosing. It's the world inflicting this on them. And it's how different kinds of people will react in different ways. And not everybody is going to be standing on top of a pile of corpses with a giant sword, with lightning striking in the background. Very few people are going to end up like that.
That's the interest. It's but that character arc of taking someone who's so unlikable to make you fall in love with them and then have you cheering for them. And later on, it is the fun part, really. Yeah,
and to kind of punch you in the gut later on with him, and think, oh no, not you, And that's one of the things that I really loved about the series when I was reading it. It was just constantly like, oh man, it was a series of gut punches over and over again. But at the same time, there's this little glimmer of hope, and it's such a tiny little flicker that's off in the distance, and it's like, well, there has to be a way. He can't just be sort of writing himself into a corner, or maybe that's the exercise. Like, let's just go as deep and dark as we can into this place, and then let's try and find how we can get out of this.
Well, it's the old saying about it's the hope that kills you,
right?
Because you got to keep going. But it's funny because my dad normally reads my books before anyone else, and he read We Are the Dead, and I think he got to the point where Darius the Chosen, was doing his first bit of torture and mayhem.
And did he want to have a long talk with you? Did he want to sit you down and say,
he literally rang me up and he said, "Are you okay? Like, is there anything you need to talk to me about?" He was really disturbed. And then as the books went on, we got to the third one. I just had this conversation where he said, there is going to be a happy ending, isn't there? There is a happy ending. Tell me that it's all going to be good. And I'm like, I don't know at the moment. I don't know. There'll be a victory of some sort, but I don't know who's going to be left standing at the end of it.
Yeah. That character in particular, I thought was one of my favorites for sure. The concept of his ability. Why don't you tell us about his ability and what makes him kind of such a just a dark.
I based a huge amount of the bad guys on during World War II. So I thought, well, if I'm doing that, and I'd read lots of stories about the occupation and things like that, but I needed my kind of officers, the ones that are going to be the really, evil people that you just want to die, but they don't seem to.
Mm-hmm.
And I obviously decide they're all going to have one superpower each, or one magical gift, whatever you want to call it. And I was just thinking about what would be the greatest gift that you could have and then turn it to evil.
Right.
So Darius, his gift is to be able to heal any wound or sickness that there is. So if you lose an arm, he could grow it back for you. But the trouble is Darius is a completely psychopathic monster of a person who really enjoys torturing people, so that his healing ability allows him to torture someone to the brink of death, bring them back, heal them, make them as right as rain, and then go for it again. And that to me, just in a wonderfully twisted way, just seemed a fantastic character, and he's such a joy to write.
Right. Yeah.
He's such a joy to write, and he gets into this weird relationship with another character who's one of the good guys, who's this sort of army general who's lost the war and he's trying to deal with that sort of stuff. And their kind of relationship that goes on throughout the book, because you don't really know if the general's insane or not, and you think he is. It was just fun.
Yeah.
It was, and maybe that makes me a bad person, but he's one of my favorites to write, because you just get to be completely awful.
He's delightfully evil and psychopathic, and but it's smart. It's really well done. Like, just that concept of having this benevolent, positive gift, but then flipping it on its head and using it for complete evil. And that's the funny thing about actually, it's not funny at all, but that's the thing with the magic system, I guess, in your world, is that it never really feels like a gift. Really, it feels like it's as much of a curse as anything else, and the sustaining of the abilities, say, this kind of stuff. It's a dark. It's that in itself there's a flip side to it. There's a flip side to the gift, where there's a price that has to come with its use.
And particularly for the heroes, it's poor old Tinstra goes on probably the darkest journey of everyone. But again, that kind of, I was thinking about athletes like Lance Armstrong, right? You win all these championships and medals and trophies and things like that, but you've cheated all the way through. So even as the crowds are cheering you on and celebrating you, you must in your mind go, I'm not worthy. And, you can't ever get out of that cycle, right? Because you've got to maintain that level of performance, which you can't do naturally, and you have to keep cheating. And Tinstra's cowardice really stems from this insecurity of not being good enough. Right. She wasn't good enough for her family. She wasn't good enough for the responsibilities. So she's always seeking that fast cut to make herself better.
Yeah.
And, the sad thing is she'd probably still be really, really impressive without the magical drugs.
Right. Yeah.
But she takes the magical drugs to be elite, and it almost destroys her as a person.
Mm-hmm.
But that to me felt very real. I tried avoiding too many people becoming godlike characters in it.
Yeah.
Everyone needs flaws that can bring them down and just make them more believable and understandable.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make.
Silverwing.
Shade is a young Silverwing bat, the runt of his colony, but he's determined to prove himself on the long, dangerous winter migration to Hibernaculum, millions of wingbeats to the south. During a fierce storm, he loses the others and soon faces the most incredible journey of his young life. Perfect for young readers who are into Amulet, Bone, Wings of Fire, or graduating from Dogman. Silverwing is the first book in this best-selling series and is available at bookstores everywhere, or you can find the link in the show notes.
Silverwing.
Well, it allows for the transformation as well. So you get to take them on that journey where they become something else or not, or that stray arrow, stray bullet does catch them. But it allows for that chance to sort of play in that and move it somewhere forward. Was it character based first, or did you sort of think of the setting? You said that you made a list of all the things that you kind of dig.
Yeah, I wrote something like 3 lines. I found it the other day, actually. I wrote something about the skulls are coming to kick your door in. What are you going to do? And I always loved that kind of samurai image of the helmet with the skull mask, and and that just felt terrifying in itself. And that really was that setting. So I had the idea of an occupied country and rebels fighting against it. And as I mentioned, Tinstra was originally like Han Solo, and it was just awful. So then I wrote that scene where she's trying to buy bread or in that case rice, and the sheer misery of being starving and not being able to have enough money. And she's just, what money she's had, she's just stolen off corpses that she's found and things like that. And the moment I wrote that, the tone felt right.
Right.
And then Dren came next because I wanted someone, if she was so reluctant to fight, I wanted someone who was just really into it and he didn't care who he fought as long as he had someone to fight. And really, it then the characters just came bouncing off each other so that everyone kind of had an opposite person. So if you have Dren who's pure anarchy, I needed someone who was all about the rules and doing the right thing, which then got you Jax and his son. And again, if you got people that are just completely selfish, I wanted someone who was selfless. So that got me thinking about a mother who would do anything for a child.
Anything, like literally anything.
But then the moment you get into that, you go, all right, well, how far can I push that love, right? And
pretty far.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Yeah. But that's the reality. How far would you go? Well, as far as there's no limit. There's no limit to how far you would go if you're her. Yeah.
And then that led on to someone who, for her, she was someone that literally had no power or no real agency and is being forced into these things. And by the end of the first book, suddenly she's actually got a bit of respect and authority. So then how does someone then deal with that responsibility? And she becomes almost too much of a control freak because of it. So it was just nice sort of taking those opposites and rolling them on and putting them through hell, really.
It's the reality too of, if you have somebody who has never had any kind of power or influence or anything like that, and then suddenly they're given some, they're going to rubber band a little too far. And just acknowledging that, and instead of being like, oh well, no, they're this kind of idealized human who wouldn't do that. It's like, well, no, if people would, and these are people in a real situation, and all of that makes the characters feel so much more alive and like fully realized 3-dimensional people. And it's really, really excellent stuff. And everybody should go pick it up and read it. I'll put the notes in or the links in the show notes and all that kind of stuff. It's the Last War series, We Are the Dead. And the opening of it as well, just the title, We Are the Dead, so smart. And you, I think the book, maybe all of them do, but I think the first book opens with kind of a prayer or I guess it'd be a prayer. Right? I guess you would call it that. It's like, it's the mantra of this group. And just that in itself, right out of the gate, sets up such good tension for what's coming, because you're saying we are all already dead.
Yeah.
Let's go.
And again, I steal a lot of influences from everywhere. And there was always that kind of samurai thing about they all believed they were dead before they went into battle, so they wouldn't hold anything back. So I wanted to get that, but I was reading the poem In Flanders Fields.
Oh, right. Yeah.
By a Canadian Army officer, and I've forgotten his name now. But in that, there's a line that says, "We are the dead who once saw sunshine on their face," or whatever that line is.
Yeah.
And again, I think sometimes, without getting too woo-woo about this, the universe pushes things in front of you at the right time.
Absolutely. 100%.
So I heard the podcast at the right time stop me from giving up. And as I was starting to write We Are the Dead, it was Remembrance Day, and I saw that poem, and I was like, well, the poem summed up exactly how I wanted the book to be. And that line of We Are the Dead really struck me, and it just felt like the right idea, because it wasn't just the Shulker that had this mantra of we are the dead and we're going to go into battle, but everyone else was living on borrowed time. And it was just a matter of, are they going to see another day? Are they going to see another week?
Yeah.
And that just, again, felt like all these jigsaw puzzles slotting into place.
Yeah, and maybe it's this moment when you realize that you can only really be alive when you realize that you're going to die and that your time is limited. And that's when you can really rise to something special, is when you acknowledge that that this is a finite time.
And now I'll start having death panics at that thought. Oh God, I'm not going to die, am I?
Right.
So, but yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely an edge too of in the action scenes and later on with some of the characters when it gets into the magic stuff, you could totally tell that you're a comic guy. And I mean that in the best possible way, because I'm a comic guy too. But you could tell that there's something in there that informs, maybe it's because you're an artist. You know, I could see there's a Rusty Boy robot, some art on your wall there.
Yeah.
Is that Jeff Darrow?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Look at that.
And I've got like most of it's from before I got married, when I had disposable income. But I've got some Eduardo Rizzo 100 Bullets.
Oh, cool.
I've got an artwork. His Jock is another artist that I love. I've got some of his work, and I've got various pages. Like there's an Eric Larson Savage Dragon on the other side and things like that.
Oh,
cool. But yeah, I mean, I kind of joke that all the stuff I loved when I was about 4 or 5, I haven't grown up from. It still brings me pleasure, and my creative space around here. I've got my comic statues, and I've got the art, and I've got my books, and I just feel comfortable being around creativity.
Yeah. And the proximity of it. The proximity of it does something.
It's really weird. I've realized that I'm one of these people that I don't actually have pictures in my mind. I can't visualize anything in my mind. I don't really understand it because I have all these thoughts that feel real. But if I sat here and think of an apple, I can't picture it.
Right.
So I don't know how it works and the way my mind is wired, but I love that kind of Jack Kirby madness that I put into We Are the Dead, and the monsters are all very Kirby-ish and what they have. And I just like that. It's that kind of relentless storytelling that comics in the old days, when they were done well, when they would sign to make you keep reading, want to buy the next issue and keep it on, that I certainly want to carry through.
Yeah, Jack Kirby has kind of this mythological. The way that I describe his art is always like it's a crude. There's a crudeness to it in a way, and it's like he's chiseling out the figure in this raw expression of something that's almost mythological. And there's a thing with him where it's sort of, he predates everybody, so he was. There were no rules, there were no rails. He was just doing his own thing as he would imagine these sort of extraordinary figures. And with that, I think comes kind of there's a mythological would be the word that I would use in a sense. They feel godlike, and it fits really well. And that, I think, lends itself into, say, the characters in The Last War. They don't feel like, say, superhero-y or this kind of thing. They feel like there's something else, like there's some other entity going on that is above and beyond sort of that rooted reality that they're in.
It's true. I just bought this the other day.
Oh man, I've been eyeing that. The Mazzucchelli.
Yeah.
But
it's just amazing art, right? I love it.
Yeah.
But what I love about that is his Batman looks like a real person,
right,
in a stupid costume,
right.
Like you really believe that there's this person in it who could get hurt at any moment, and there's just and the simplicity of the line work and everything just conveys so much weight and everything. It's incredible to be able to read it at the size it was drawn at and see all the sweat and tear that goes into it.
Yeah. That one's been on my list. I absolutely love those artist editions. The last one that I got was the Todd McFarlane thing, just because it's like 90s kid.
Yeah,
that he was a huge influence, also the fact that he was Canadian, I thought was so cool. It's like, oh look, it's like a guy from here who's gone off and done something, and yeah, I love it. And the size of them as well is just amazing.
It was my birthday, so I treated myself to that one, and
Nice.
Paul Smith's X-Men
cool. Yeah,
one, which is just amazing as well.
Yeah.
But I just enjoy creativity, and I love being around it, and I love people who are creative. I've got 3 friends here who are writers, and we meet up every 2 to 3 weeks for lunch.
Oh, cool.
And they're the only people in my life that I can have a conversation with about the inside of my brain without sounding like I'm insane.
Yeah.
Because I have all these things that are going on all the time.
Yeah.
And I often think I have to write or draw or whatever I'm doing to clear some space in my mind for the other thing that's butting in, demanding to be made real.
Yeah.
And I think I've never realized how important it is to have other people like yourself that you can talk to about.
Oh, you have to. That's half the reason I'm doing this right now. That's a huge part of why I'm doing this.
I show you that book and you're like, oh wow, that's so good. Like, people that have come around the house have seen it, just think it's this big, oversized, expensive kids drawing. Like, you spent how much on that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so important to have that. I mean, I'm running off of fumes from, I was at Emerald City Comic-Con for the last few days last week, and it's just this giant love fest of comic book energy, pop culture energy, this kind of thing. But the main thing is, like, I was there as an artist with a thing that people are coming up and getting signed, and to my left is our comic people, and to my right it's like all the, like, you're kind of in this world, and it's like, oh, these are actually my peers. This is so cool. And I don't have that in my real world. My real world, there's just nobody who I'm just the resident alien, So it's huge to have that where you can actually go, and whether it's meeting for lunch every couple weeks, something, you have to recharge those batteries in a way, because it's a really solitary experience.
Yeah.
Being a writer.
It's funny because I was very jealous that you were there. It's been a while since I've been able to go along to one of those things, but I think one of the challenges that we all face is that we love what we do so much that the money side of it doesn't really matter. It's that joy that you get of people coming up and saying, have you done this? And you talk about it, and you sign something, and you hang out with other artists, and you're all getting excited by what you're making. And it's that joy of creation that gets us out of bed and drives us to do this. And then it hits that hard reality of you got rent and you got bills and, how do I make this pay enough? So that's the eternal sort of challenge.
Yeah. How do I make it pay enough, and how do I do that while still creating work that I'm happy with and that I
exactly.
like?
Yeah.
So what's the answer? What's the solution?
I wish I knew. I think that's why I do so many different things, apart from this creative urge to make stuff. Because the reality is you need different income streams coming in to pay the bills and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really lucky that I self-publish the detective books, and that essentially gives me a monthly salary because, I get money from Amazon every month, whereas the We Are the Dead books, you sign a deal and, it's nice, but it's spread over. You get a lump when you sign,
totally.
a lump when you deliver, a lump when they publish, and so on.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Because it's a 3-book deal, that's spread over 5 years as well. So you're just like, and then they sell the book for 99p in a sell, and you're like, there's 700 pages in that book. I don't even know what that works out as a page rate. So
yeah, it's like the thing that I'm doing right now. It's a 3-book deal over that same kind of amount of time span, and you get a lump, and it's like, okay, cool. Well, that'll just pay off the debt accumulated from the last lump.
Here's the credit bill. But it's great. I just think I've been really lucky because I keep meeting people that I love working with, that inspire me and things like that. And I spent when I was a kid, I was obviously this comic book freak, and I wanted to draw comic books, and I was writing all these stories and things like that. And looking back now, that's who I was. And then at school, I kept being told that, what are you going to do for a living though, right? That's a nice hobby. What's going to be your real job? What's your real job? And I kind of went on this pathway, which was, I did very well. I worked in advertising. I made $1 million commercials and worked all over the world, and I had this great life. But there was it was almost like that kid inside me that had been shut away.
Right.
And bit by bit, he forced himself out. And now I still do a bit of advertising, but I spend my life now writing books and telling stories and doing illustrations and things like that. And I've come full circle really, and I can make a living from it, and I can support my family from it.
Right.
And I'm much happier now because I'm being true to myself, and I'm not selling myself off for a salary.
Yeah.
And I think the work benefits from that as well. Yeah. Because at the moment you can free yourself. And a lot of interesting things have happened as a result of that.
Yeah, I think there's this, say with pop culture, there's kind of this obsession with youth, and maybe it comes from music. It's you have these young musicians that hit and they rise to success at a very early age. Your Kurt Cobains and these kinds of characters. But to me, art is the long game. It's a really long game of a slow build and a slow discovery and accumulating your skills and just getting better, finding out how you're going to navigate this. And it's something where it's almost inevitable that if you pursue that, if you keep going with it, eventually later on in life, it'll begin to unfold. And that might be when you're in your 40s or 50s or whatever. But at the same time, it's a great optimistic way to look at it, or at least that's what I tell myself, because it's like your best work is way ahead of you. I'm hoping that when I'm 70, I'll be peaking and doing some good work as the energy dips.
At this rate, I might be. No, but again, the great thing about art and whatever you create, it could be music, it could be books, it could be whatever it is. If you take something that you were so proud of a year ago or 2 years ago, you can still see the advancement you've made in your skills.
Absolutely.
And I've got stuff that at the time I was just, this is amazing. And I look now and I'm like, oh my God, that's like a child's drawing. But
Right.
really, it's just that constant practice and learning and improving all the time.
Yeah.
And I often thought with writing books, they would get easier with each one I do, but they get harder because I know I want to challenge myself in the way I tell stories, and I try writing in different genres and things like that. But that's all part of me being constantly restless and wanting to push myself creatively in what I do. And I think the worst thing is when you see people that are just phoning it in and just
Totally.
living off whatever their past glory was.
Yeah.
And you can, I'm a massive Frank Miller fan, and I love,
me too. Yeah,
I love his early stuff, and I love Ronin and The Dark Knight, and he's at a stage now where his art has just carried on changing and evolving, and I don't like where he's at now.
Yeah,
but I can understand the route he's gone to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the guy's made enough money, and like if this is what turns him on, it's great. It's like Picasso in his blue period at the end, right? I'm sure everyone was like, well, where are those wonky figures that we loved? And he's like, but this is where I am now.
Yeah.
And again, I think most artists go on that kind of journey.
Yeah, it's when you don't see development or change, and I think that's a huge part of being an artist is just constant growth, possibly it's because of adaptation, because that journey is a really strange one. It's not a normal one for people to do, to pursue art seriously. So part of that is adaptation, which means learning and discovery, finding a way to get through it. And through that, you develop your craft, you hopefully get better, and you're always developing and always learning, hopefully along the way. And that's the thing that's kind of exciting, because you will have no idea how you'll be drawing, like you yourself, you'll have no idea what your art will look like in 20 years. And, maybe you'll go down a Frank Miller road and it'll be a parody of a parody of a parody.
But even late Jack Kirby at the time, I hated it, right? I wanted him to go back to how he did the Fantastic Four and stuff. But I look at it now and I can appreciate the genius that's in it.
Right.
And again, it's an artist where the restraints have been taken off him, and he's drawing the madness in his head, and I can see the energy and appreciate it what it is. But sometimes these things take a while for us all to, I love Bob Dylan now, but if you'd asked me 30 years ago, I thought it was terrible, so.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make.
It doesn't matter how rich you are when death knocks at your door. A killer stalks the streets of London, murdering the richest people in the capital. Is this the work of a serial killer, or just someone angry with the super rich? Or is there another reason why billionaires are being killed every 3 days? Detective Inspector Simon Wise, reeling from the death of his partner and harboring more than a few secrets of his own, is assigned to the case. But the killer leaves no clues as to their identity, only bodies in their wake, and each new death sends Wise's team in startling new directions.
Find out more at mikeshackle.co.uk. Links are in my show notes.
So you had written, you said 3 books before We Are the Dead was published.
Yeah.
So how exactly did that come about with the publisher? How did that kind of manifest itself?
Well, I had, on the second book I wrote, I did get an agent who said that book wasn't sellable, but he liked my writing, and if I wanted to work on something with him, so I signed this deal. So I thought I had a foot in the door. Halfway through writing my third book, he was like, this is too much effort for me, and so we dropped out. But we stayed friends, we stayed in touch, and I was nearly finished writing We Are Dead. He wrote to me just saying, hey, how are you? Are you still writing? And I said, well, funnily enough, I'm just finishing this book and I think it's really good. And I told him the hook about the enemy's won, all the heroes are dead. What are you going to do about it?
Right.
And he was like, I want to read it already. And then so I sent it through to him. He loved it immediately, said he wanted to rep me again. We worked on it together for about 6 months, just tightening up things, and he wanted a whole new opening section.
Okay.
Just so that we could see the invasion happening. And then, went off to their 10 fancy publishers in the UK. It got sent to them. We got our first offer within a week.
Holy cow. Wow.
And then it went to auction in the end. But again, this is where I'm terrible, because it was published by Glance, who published all my favorite authors.
Well, yeah, that's speaking of fancy publishers. Yeah.
And the moment I knew they were interested, I was like, well, look, I know money's an issue, but really, I want to be published by them. But that's why you need an agent to sort that stuff out.
Yeah.
And then it all happened quite quickly, really. So within a month of being on submission, I had a deal, and which is really quick going. It can take 6 months to a year normally.
Yeah, no kidding.
And that was that.
So very slowly and then all at once. Is that kind of the moment? Was that previous to that? Obviously, you've had successes in your professional life, but on the writing front, was that really the moment that you're kind of like, holy cow, I've crossed over some kind of barrier?
Yes and no. I don't think that feeling ever really goes, because someone described it to me as you have a mountain that you want to climb,
right?
And you reach the top, and then suddenly you realize there's a even bigger mountain behind it, and then you got to climb that one, and then it just keeps on going. So, but I do have moments where I've been on panels with people that I've paid money in the past to listen to, and there's this part of me going, "Oh my God, that's so and so over there," and I can't believe I'm with them. And I still get a massive kick when people compare my book to people I admire, or I see pictures of them next to each other and things like that.
Yeah.
So someone described my book as Tarantino meets Game of Thrones, and that was just that was like the ultimate fanboy moment. I was like, oh my God, that's fantastic.
I think actually when I was first introduced to your work, it was somebody, that's actually what hooked me. Somebody said, is this the next Game of Thrones? And I thought, oh, okay, I'll give it a read. And then I just fell into it and loved it. But that was actually one of the hooks that kind of got me to read it.
All the reviews have been amazing. I've had Grimdark Perfection, Masterpiece, and everyone who reads it tends to really enjoy it. Just not enough people are reading it yet. We need more people to go out and get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody do that. Speaking of Game of Thrones and TV stuff and all these other kind of mediums, comics, all that jazz, is there some kind of other medium that you'd like to work within or see your work adapted to? And if so, what would that be? Would it be comics or movies or anime?
Well, everyone wants a TV series or a movie made.
Right.
The spy book I've written on they'll be coming out later this year under Michael Dillon. That was actually originally written as a TV treatment.
Oh, okay.
And that's been sitting in my computer waiting for me to get around to it for about 5 or 6 years now.
Okay.
So that's where that originated from. There's been some film interest in We Are the Dead, but it'd be the budget on that would be astronomical.
Crazy. Yeah.
But I wouldn't mind a sort of anime version being made of it as well. I think that would work very well.
It kind of fits. It fits with sort of the. You can imagine how it would work.
I love Arcane on Netflix. I think.
Yeah. Visually,
that kind of style would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, and like obviously, I want to do comics, and like the list of things I want to do and make is long, and my biggest enemy is time and money to do it all, really. So
right. The resources. So with that's interesting. With the Dillon, with the Michael Dillon work, that's self-published, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
along with the Witchfinder Chronicles, that's also self-published. So what are some of the benefits to self-publishing, do you think? Is it, because there's this like, you've been on both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
So what are some of the benefits to self-publishing versus going through a traditional publisher? If any?
No, and to be honest, there are, because I think the people seem to think if you're published by a traditional publisher, your book automatically gets into bookstores,
right?
And they'll be marketing it, and they'll be doing all this sort of stuff. But what they and I love my publisher, and they're great people, but what they do is they spend a certain amount of money buying a lot of books, and it's like being at a roulette table, and they're putting money down on different numbers, and they spin the wheel, and one or two of them will come up, and that will recoup plus, and that's how they make the money. And the rest, if they get their money back, it's great. If they don't, but they're already working out what their next bet is. So they're only worried about your latest, the next one that's coming out.
Right.
So you end up doing a lot of promotion yourself, and you are really left on your own to a greater or lesser extent. And what I've found with self-publishing is I get obviously complete control. I don't have to have arguments with people about cover art or...
Yeah, you can just do your... luckily, you're good artists, so you can just...
Well, to be honest, or maybe that's a hindrance, because maybe that makes me difficult because I have an opinion. But the third book in the Last Wars trilogy, the oversized trade paperback, sold out in 2 weeks. But someone at Glance made a decision not to do a reprint because it was so big, and so they're like, well, that's his market, is sold out, and we won't sell any more. I was out of print for a year until the mass market.
Oh, right at the wave, and that's probably right at the initial wave of interest.
Yeah, so and it was just like it's become self-fulfilling, because they say, well, you're only going to sell that amount, so we're only going to print that. So they're right, but no one else has an option. But we did limited edition hardcovers, 1,000 copies of each, and they sold out in a couple of days.
Yeah, beautiful.
So,
those are just gorgeous. Yeah.
And again, that was a dream for me, to go to a warehouse and just see pallet after pallet of these beautiful books lined up. But, I would have done it all for free just for that moment in itself.
Yeah.
But so that's, and after everything that I'd been through writing those books, which was very, I don't want to say soul sapping, but it was exhausting. And then there were the publishing issues. I kind of fell out of love a bit with fantasy.
Okay.
And I do have another big epic that I've been writing, but I haven't got right. And I just don't feel like I've had the space and time to sit and work it out, if that makes sense. I mean, it's that whole thing about writer's block. There's something not working in the story.
Yeah.
But I need the peace and quiet to pull it apart and think about it. And I haven't had that opportunity. And the Witchfinder Chronicles came about. Someone asked me to write a short story for an anthology. And it was completely riffing, making up as I went along. I picked Elizabethan England because I knew it and people know it, and you think frilly collars, and you can already picture what the world looks like, and you don't have to invent too much.
Yeah. And then you have that fun of all the superstition and all of the kind of mythology that's wrapped around there, all the legends and myths.
And to be honest, I wrote about 3 pages about people throwing crap out their windows into the street and things like that. But it became a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
And I ended up pulling it out of the anthology because I didn't think it was right for the theme of the book. But I had this story and a character which I really loved. And I thought, well, every month I'm going to sit and write a short story, and I'm going to steal monsters from British mythology, and it's set in this time where I know what's happening historically, and it just became a shorthand to get to a fun story.
So you did 12 of these then, or the intention is 12. The
intention is 12, and I see it very much as like a TV series where each month it's a new episode.
Yeah.
So it's kind of self-contained, but there's this bigger ongoing drama that they have to sort out. And at the moment, the only place you can get it is on my website. But when it's complete, it's going to be published into a limited edition hardcover with all the illustrations and everything.
Yeah.
But again, the plan is to make that super exclusive. So it'll only exist in that one shape and form for a short time.
See, and that's kind of the beauty of self-publishing too, is that you have that control to do that.
Yeah.
You can produce big, beautiful books that you wish a publisher would do, but won't necessarily run with, so you can just do it yourself.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if you've got the fan base and if you've got the readership.
And people seem to love it, who are reading it. And it's just fun for me to do, right? It's like monster of the week. Who should we face this week? And I'm weaving Arthurian legend in it, which is 1,000 years before, but it's kind of coming back as well, and that's great fun because I'm geeking out about learning all this stuff that I didn't know.
Yeah.
But all the characters have got their original Welsh names rather than the kind of modern Hollywood names and things like that.
Okay, so there's a lot of like Finneligau and
I can't. That's right. I can't even pronounce it. Right. I'm typing it and stuff like that.
3 F's, a W with a line over it or something. Yeah.
And again, having to do the covers, it forces me to practice my own art as well.
Right.
Which I'm really enjoying doing as well.
Yeah. I wonder if your art and the comic side of your brain informs your action sequences and this kind of thing, because you have really good choreography. I found that reading your action sequences, they really have a punchy, there's an animated feel to it, I guess, in a sense. I don't know. I've worked as a storyboard artist, and so you're kind of like choreographing superheroes fighting each other and this kind of stuff. Well, and there's a pacing to it that really reads like proper action that just feels fluid and makes sense. And I wonder if that comes from your sensibilities with visual storytelling.
It's really funny because I had a few people write to me asking whether I served in the military and if I'd seen action, because they were veterans and they found it all really realistic. And I was like, oh my God, that's so kind of you to say. But no, I haven't. But I watch a lot of movies, and there's certain things like the opening to Saving Private Ryan. I watched quite a lot before the invasion that I had to write in book 3, just because I wanted to kind of get that kind of kinetic madness of it all. And there's certain moments like that where I will watch something to get inspired and then try and translate that into words and things like that.
Yeah. So when did you start writing seriously? Is this something you've always done as a kid? Or was this something that you kind of grew into later on? Or
I did it. I wrote a lot and drew a lot, and I did my own comic books when I was a kid. And my English teacher published in the school magazine a story I'd written called The Ultra Warrior, which was about this guy that had experiments done on him, and he got complaints because it was so violent and bloodthirsty. And he was like, "But it's a great story," and he really stood up for me, and I really, I remember him and owe him a lot.
Cool.
But I always wanted to write a book, and it was something that was at the back of my mind, and I tried a couple of times and just gave up. And then someone I knew wrote a book, and it was terrible, and they kept sending it to me to read and give advice on, and I kept doing it, becoming more and more angry that this book was just terrible.
Right.
And my wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, but we were dating, she said, but at least they've written a book. She said, I've heard you mention quite a few times that you want to do this, but you never have. They've done it. So even if it's bad, they've done more than you can. And that was kind of the impetus for me to do it. And I just worked out that in the evenings I was watching bad TV. And if I just went to bed at 10 o'clock, I could get up at 5 o'clock and I could write for 2 hours. And it was quality time where I wasn't worrying about work. I wasn't worrying about anything else. I could just concentrate on what I was producing, and that was a game changer, really.
Yeah, I think Alan Moore said something about how it's equally important to read terrible work as it's just as important to read bad stuff as good stuff, because you see the mistakes and the flaws and what could be changed and how to improve it.
I mean, to be honest, there's some really famous authors I just can't stand
Right.
the way they write their books, and they're bajillion sellers, and I'm like, why don't I get it? But I can't write like that.
So is that your ritual? 5 a.m. is when you start writing?
It used to be,
Okay.
but now I kind of write more or less full time. So now I start at 9 after the kids have gone, and I try and get 2,000 or 3,000 words done a day.
Okay. So you're kind of locked in. It's a 9 to 5 type thing. And yeah. How do you? That's tough to climb the mountain, and especially it's good that you don't believe in writer's block, because then you can't use that excuse if you're not productive in a day.
But it can become frustrating trying to work out why you can't write,
right?
And things like that, and life gets in the way as well. Stuff happens that you just need to deal with, so it stops you being productive.
Half the battle is just showing up. It's like going to the gym. It's like it's just keep showing up. Yeah, it's like and
it's I always compare it to running. I used to run a lot, and when you're running every day, it's easy. It's when you don't go for 2 months and you try going again, and
exactly,
it becomes difficult.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Mike Shackle, thank you so much for indulging me.
Real pleasure,
and being a guest. Very much appreciated.
Really appreciate. I could talk to you for ages.
And everybody, please check out all the show notes and descriptions and all that jazz, and check out his work. It's absolutely amazing. You will love it. He's got the ratings on Goodreads and stuff are just crazy. They're all like crazy high ratings. Everybody who reads your stuff absolutely loves it. So yeah.
To be honest, blowing his own trumpet, they're all rated about 4.4 out of 5, I think.
Yeah.
The low, and that's the fancy and the crime and everything else. So I'm quite chuffed.
Yeah, it's almost
I write very commercially, so I think if you want a good time, you like it.
It's almost like you're a really good writer. So I think it's something like that. Yeah. Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll talk again.
Right. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make.
It is the year of our Lord, 1585. Elizabeth sits upon the English throne. Many call it the Golden Age, as poetry, music and literature blossom across the land. However, the peace in which England flourishes is a fragile thing. War with Spain looms ever closer as the Catholic Church seeks to overthrow the woman they know as the heretic queen. As Elizabeth mobilizes the whole country to face this threat, little does she know that a far greater threat is emerging from the shadows. For England was built on dark satanic hills. It is the land of Herne and the Wild Hunt. It's the home of the Bean Shear and the Black Shark. It's where red caps lurk and the Selkie linger. Nukilavi swim in the oceans and ogres frolic in the mountains. And yet, they are not the worst of the horrors to come. If England is to survive, one man must face this evil alone and defeat it. Lord John Willem le Grey, Witchfinder General to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth. Join him if you dare as darkness falls across the land. The Witchfinder Chronicles by Mike Shackle. Available at mikeshackle.co.uk.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make.
It doesn't matter how rich you are when death knocks at your door. A killer stalks the streets of London, murdering the richest people in the capital. Is this the work of a serial killer or just someone angry with the super rich? Or is there another reason why billionaires are being killed every 3 days? Detective Inspector Simon Wise, reeling from the death of his partner and harboring more than a few secrets of his own, is assigned to the case. But the killer leaves no clues as to their identity, only bodies in their wake, and each new death sends Wise's team in startling new directions.
Find out more at mikeshackle.co.uk. Links are in my show notes.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make.
Silverwing.
Shade is a young Silverwing bat, the runt of his colony, but he's determined to prove himself on the long, dangerous winter migration to Hibernaculum, millions of wingbeats to the south. During a fierce storm, he loses the others and soon faces the most incredible journey of his young life. Perfect for young readers who are into Amulet, Bone, Wings of Fire, or are graduating from Dogman. Silverwing is the first book in this best-selling series and is available at bookstores everywhere, or you can find the link in the show notes.
Silverwing.